Welcome back, everyone. My name is Alderman Dave Tenza. I'm here helping out with a series for candidates who are running in the upcoming state primary and general elections. We're joined right now by Ray Newman. Ray, thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
And please, if you could just introduce yourself. We all know your better half, Sue, but if you could let us know about you and why you're running.
She is my better half.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I'm running is the fact that Sue is my wife, and I've had experience. I've been interested in politics from the time that I talked with my grandmother about JFK, who she didn't like, and who I did like. So we had some pretty interesting discussions. So I followed politics for a long time, but I was in the military, and then in the FAA and under the Hatch Act. You couldn't really get involved in that kind of politics. But luckily, when we moved to New Hampshire from 1988 on, when Joe Biden was running for president the first time, our family has always been involved in that kind of political activity. And Sue was elected 2 years ago to be a state rep, and I jokingly tell people that I was her chief of staff, but I didn't have any staff. But we had an opportunity to look at, or I had an opportunity to look at the things that she was doing and the kind of activity that's going on in Concord and the vote she was casting and why, and just got pretty much involved in a lot of that stuff. And I realized that they needed qualified candidates in Ward 3, and I feel that I'm one of the candidates, and I thought it would be a pretty nice idea to try and get elected myself. So
well, that's
we are
great.
both running. We're both trying to be elected. So.
And so you have, although you don't have elected experience, you have that experience of you've been very involved up in Concord on the issues that are going on. Are there any issues in particular that you care about or would like to work on if you were elected?
Well, there are several. I mean, probably a primary one is voter rights. I mean, I think that every American citizen should have the right to vote, and I don't think there should be impediments to that right to vote. And I think that some of the things that are coming out of the State House are actually impediments to people's ability to vote. Another thing is the problem of gun violence. I think that we need to start taking at least some baby steps in order to do something to stop gun violence. I'll tell you an experience that we had. We were visiting down in Florida, and it was around the time of Parkland, and we were driving from Miami back north to my daughter's house in Port St. Lucie. And we said, oh, there's a sign. Let's just go see what's going on. And by happenstance, that was the day that the kids were going back to school. And experiencing that was just monumental. It was so sad, in what was going on. So that's an issue that I'd be concerned with. Another one would be access to health care. Luckily, with the job that I had government health care. I had access to health care. I didn't have trouble getting health care.
Right.
And now I get Medicare. And I kept my health care because I'm worried about people taking away your access to health care. So it's fairly expensive, but at least I know that I have some access. And I think all citizens should have that kind of access to health care.
And that's something, I mean, healthcare access, if you're fortunate to have a job in employer-based healthcare. I know that when I worked for the county, didn't think about it too much until I went into private practice and off on my own. I tell everybody, my health care from 2017 to 2018 for my family went up 75% for less coverage. And if we tried to raise people's taxes 75%, it'd be an outrage. But
and taxes is another issue. One thing that we were talking about the other day was things that go on in Concord where over the years they have constantly cut back in the amount of money that they provide to localities and cities and towns. And so you often hear the no new taxes. Well, there have been a lot of new taxes over those years, but the new taxes were your property taxes went up. Because what happens at the State House has an effect on what goes on in Ward 2, which is the ward where we're having this race for District 29 is the same as Ward 2.
Yes.
So
you've been a resident of Ward 2 since 1981,
Yeah, we moved into Ward 2 in 1981. I worked for the FAA. I was an air traffic controller and a supervisor at the control center in Nashua.
Okay.
And yeah, I've been here since then.
Okay. So you've seen a lot of changes to the city and to the state.
Oh, yeah, seen a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Seen a bunch of them.
A lot of those changes have been good changes. I'm sure you'll agree.
Oh, I think they have. I think that we're doing better now than we have in the past. I mean, I think about city government. I think it's pretty efficient. You know, everybody complains about potholes and stuff, but there's not a lot you can do about that. But you need to be able to provide the resources to take care of the services that people need. I mean, the streets get plowed pretty well, and there are a lot of community events. The downtown seems to be resurging, so I think that things are going pretty well, and I'm glad to see that. And I'd like to see some changes be made at the State House that would make things better.
Sure, support what we're doing here at the local level. And one of those things that we've talked with a number of candidates about is commuter rail.
Well, that's another one that just didn't pop into my head when you asked. Sue was very involved in that because her committee was highway. I think it was highways and public works, and she may have mentioned it, but they did do had a commuter rail study, and that's the first step. You have to take the first step before you can get to the ultimate goal.
Right.
And commuter rail would be a big thing. As a matter of fact, we were walking around yesterday and talking to a lady who commutes to Boston and wanted to know more information about that. And I think you could do a study, you could find out whether it was feasible or not, and then there would be steps where you could, go to Nashua initially, then maybe Manchester. That would support the Manchester airport. There were one back, and I know from air traffic, there was more than 2 million employments back about 4 or 5 years ago, and now they're down to less than 1 million. So commuter rail could have an effect on that in bringing that back. Yeah. And then eventually it might even go, years from now, it might even make all its way up to the State House, up to Concord.
Yeah, and that's it'd be nice to envision that. Unfortunately, we got to get it start
you have
here
to
in
take the first
Nashville.
step. You have to take the study, and there was money for a study, and the governor he said he wanted the study and was all in favor of rail when Amazon thought they might put their headquarters in Litchfield, and that lasted until they said, no, we're not going to do that, and pretty soon the money was gone.
Right. One of the first things you mentioned was about access to voting for folks. Right. What are some of the changes that have been made that you oppose? And a lot of times we hear, what's the big deal about why requiring someone to show picture ID, requiring them to show a license. What's the response?
It's probably not a big deal for people to show a picture ID, but it is a big deal for people who cannot get an ID. So I think the first thing you'd have to do is make some kind of, and I couldn't say the details, but make it feasible both fiscally and people that can't get around, that people can actually somehow get an ID, something other than a driver's license. People that have a driver's license, they don't have to go get a new driver's license. But if you don't have a driver's license, you got to do something. Or for the students that come in here, I think that current bill that has passed, and I think it was signed, I'm not sure, but where the college students, for years, and in most states, they can vote where they go to school because they're 9 months out of the year, so the politics affects them. So there should be, I'm opposed to that kind of a bill that puts an impediment on voting.
Yeah, and we've so I've talked with other candidates who have talked about these same issues, and I relay that. For my first time voting here in New Hampshire was in the 2000 presidential primary, and that was such a great experience for me to be involved in that. I have no doubt that that's part of what brought me back here later on after I met my wife and had an opportunity to be back here. So I want to talk because you have three children.
Yes, that's correct. We're kind of a blended family, second marriage. So I have a daughter that lives in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and Sue, we have 2 children, a daughter and a son that live in North Carolina. Okay. And then there are 6 little grandchildren. So
right.
And the oldest one is 16 right now, and they go down to 5.
Oh wow.
So it's very interesting. And I'll say something about. our grandson in Port St. Lucie, Florida, you hear a lot of people saying everybody should have free college. Well, that's probably a good goal, but you have to get there. And I was surprised to learn that he was able to take a test and qualify and whatever to take college courses as a sophomore in high school.
Oh, wow.
And he took college courses. He took 2 college courses each semester in that time frame. And now this year, when he's a junior, he actually goes. He took him in the high school. He goes to the community college, which is down the street, for the classes at the college campus. And so he'll have an opportunity to get part of his college education because the city of Port St. Lucie pays, and I think because it's community college, the fee is very low for that, and people can take advantage of that. So there's ways to do things like that by starting small at the community colleges and get people to where people see the benefit of it, and then they're willing to see why it's a benefit to the community.
Right. That's such a huge issue for young families, for retaining
and I think
students.
the other thing about healthcare is that the things that were required of insurance in the Affordable Care Act were things that made sure that it covered people that had pre-existing conditions and things like that. And I think that there's a trend up at the State House to start to loosen those conditions, and the result of that, and I know it from when my own son was going to college, we ended up buying a fairly expensive policy that had like a $10,000 or $12,000 deductible.
Right.
And the reason was we didn't want to go bankrupt if something happened. And that's the kind of policies that some people look at as good policies with a savings account. For some people that are going paycheck to paycheck, that are never going to be able to put money into a health savings account.
Right.
Health savings account.
Right. No, and it's a issue that needs to be tackled locally and nationally. And
well, it's relevant to the state representatives because they have some input on a regulation of insurance that's sold in the state. So
right.
And so it does have that.
And I've said this before too. I mean, I think that here in Nashville and New Hampshire, we're a small enough state that we can make a difference on these kind of issues, and we can be a incubator, so to speak, for other test lab for other states, and to figure out which policies work best.
And one of the things that we talked about earlier about rail is that rail lets people get into Boston for all the social activities and whatever. It might keep our kids here. It brings people that are qualified to do the work here.
Right.
So the rail, and people say that we're subsidizing that. Well, I know from experience you are subsidizing air travel because there's a lot of money spent on trying to keep airplanes from hitting each other. That's all a subsidy.
Yeah.
And the same thing for the buses and the highway. There's a lot of subsidies that go on for that make up the difference between what our gas tax doesn't cover and whatnot. So.
Right.
So we subsidize all kinds of transportation.
Right. Right. And this will just be. I mean, really, rail is as much of a environmental and quality of life issue as it is anything else. So. So we're down to our final minute. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about you or your candidacy?
No, I think this 10 minutes we had a lot of points, so I think this 10 minutes went fairly well, and I appreciate your efforts in asking the questions.
No problem. If people would like to get in touch with you, is there a particular...
Well, right now we don't have a website yet, and we don't have a Facebook page yet, but in Ward 2 there is a primary. There are 4 candidates running for 3 seats. So we would like to get through that primary, and then I envision setting up that kind of thing before the general election, and then maybe even afterwards as a mechanism, because some people complain they don't know what's going on at the state. A mechanism maybe for the ward where people go to a page and see what's going on in the page. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it's
But I'll give you my phone number and my email. Okay. My email is RN Romeo November 2198@AOL.com.
Okay.
And the telephone number is 603-880-8973.
Great. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, they'll be able to do so.
Reach out to me anytime.
Great. Well, Ray,
I'll take care of it.
Thank you very much for being here.
I appreciate it.
Best of luck in the campaign.
Thank you.
And that does it for this segment. We'll be right back with our next candidate.